So today we are going to be talking about JavaScript objects. Objects is an entity. An entity can be anything. Your media player is an entity. Your human is an entity. Computer is an entity. Phone. You can model any of these entities in terms of code. So when you pick one entity, which, for example, car. If you pick a car is a real life object. Let's forget about code now and think about a car as a real object. So a car can have properties. Properties like color, properties like weight, properties like name, model. These are all properties that a car can have. And they also have some functions that they can perform. Something like starting the car, driving the car, braking, stopping. All these are functions that a car can perform, and we call them methods when it comes to JavaScript. You can refer to them as methods or functions. So all can have these properties, but the values can differ from car to car. For example, a car name have the property name. If you check several cars, their name will always be different, but they are the same car. You will see some cars have color white, some have color black, but they are of the same property, which is color. So the same with methods. The way car A starts might be different from the way car B starts, but they are the same method, start. So JavaScript objects you can use to model this same real-life objects the same way you can think it in that logical manner. So previously we defined here that variables are containers for holding values. Is the same in JavaScript objects. Those properties, they hold values. Remember we did this, var A equals to, say, Fayat. This is, let me use something meaningful. So var name, and we can do console.log this name, whatever that is the value, print it out. You see it here. We've learned this, and this is clear. Now, when you come to JavaScript object, this name becomes the property or attribute. So we want to model a car, and a car has a name. Now we define our objects. You already know the syntax of creating an object. This is an empty object. Now, we want to give this car in the name attribute. Remember how we assigned a variable name here. In JavaScript object, we put in this attribute as the key, followed by the column. Then you pass in the value. In this case, fiat. Now, see this and this as the same. This is just individual variable, but here you created an object that can hold multiple of these. The same with the color. If you say color white, you can also assign here color like this, white. This is how to assign values in your object. Now, if we want to print these values, you access them. You have two different ways that you can access values of an object. The first one, you can reference it by the name, followed by dots, and followed by the name of the property. So you do car.name to access a property that is defined within this object. Now, if we log this, you get the same fiat. You can also access the property using the square bracket. Instead of the dot, you use square bracket, and you put in the name of the property as a string. So instead of just putting name like this here, we are going to put it in a quote. And this is the second way. If we run this, you see the same value is printed. So you can either use the dot operator to access the property name, or you use the square operator and passing the property name as a string. These are two ways that you can access value of an object. Now, you can also name your property name with a string, like what Love did before. You can name it with a string, say model, and you can pass in the model name, and you can access it exactly the same way, model. If I run this, you get the model. You can also use the dot operator to access it. Even though you created it with a string, you can also access it with the dot operator and you will get the same value. Now, the only benefit why you might want to use a quoting for naming your property like this is for any reason, if you want to have two words like model A or anything, for example, you will hardly need to do this, but there might be a time that the key is dynamically generated and you have some keys that have space like this. It can happen. So in order to access this, you have to only use the square bracket to access it, because you cannot do dot model space A. JavaScript will scream. But you can do this and you will not have any problem. So here you see the model is printed 400. So that is the only time that we want to do this. But it's not advisable. Always have your key pairs. Always have your key pairs like this, using variable naming rules. Okay. Now we talk about method. Our car can start and our car can move, drive, and stop. The same way we define this key is the same way we can define any method of choice. So we want to add a starting functionality. So start is going to be a function, and this is the syntax again of writing a function inside your JavaScript object. When you do this, this becomes a function, and you can invoke it by adding the parentheses in front of it, of the name. So we assume this is the function for starting. So in order for us to invoke this function, we do the same way we access the properties. The same way, because the function is also a property, but in this case, it is a method because the value is a function. So you can also access the start with a dot operator. And in order to invoke this function, we have to put the parentheses after the name. And you can run this, and you see here, starts. Now it shows undefined here because the function doesn't return any value. Now you can also return a value from the function. You can return started here, for example. So if we run this again, rather than undefined, you get started, which is the value that is returned from this function. So this is how you invoke a method of an object. Any question until now?
No question for now. But I've seen something like that undefined. I don't know that it's because of that return function. I cause it, but I've not.
Good. So we can also add more methods or add as many methods as we need. So we have start, we can add stop, put your function, and here we say console.log stopped. And we can come here and invoke stop. And if we run this, you see stopped printed there. Now, your method can also have parameters. Just exactly the way you add parameters to your function when you define function independently, the same way you can do it here also. Let's say this our stop method, we want to add a parameter, say the time when we want to stop, and we can print this value stopped, then the time. So here we can pass in the time, say 12 p.m. And when we run this, you see stopped and the value we passed to it. So this is how you can add a parameter to your object method. And you can add as many parameters as you want. It's not a must that you add only one parameter. You can add multiple. The same rule apply, separated by comma. So the next thing now is to discuss how do you manipulate or change the properties of an object. So the same way, when you want to manipulate a variable, you can reference the name and assign to it. The same way you can do with an object. The same way that you can override a defined variable with a new value is the same way you do in an object. You can reference the name of the object dot the attribute name that you want to change, followed by the equal to, and you can change the name of the car. So if you come back in the future to check the value of the car name right now, you see that it holds the new value, golf. Same with any property that you define, you can change it like this. You can also add a new property to your object after you have defined it. Maybe you want to dynamically add a property after you've done the initial definition. So you can do car dot the new property name that you want to add. Let's say right now our car has we have model name, color, maybe weight. We don't have weight currently, so we want to add weight. So we can say 3,500. And this property will now be available in the car. Let's print the whole car object so you see what's going on there. So you see here, let's print this car before and after. So you see here, if you look at this object, there is no weight in the first printout. Now, if you look at the second one, you will see that there is weight in there. So you can assign a new attribute like this, and it will recognize it. You can set a new attribute onto your object like this. You can also use the square brackets format. So you can also use the square bracket format to add a new property. So let's say we want to add this weight, and we want to also add what other property that card can have. Maybe the number of doors that it has. So we say number of doors, and we can say 4. So you can also add a new property like this. If we run this again, you will see here we have number of doors and we have weight. Now, you can also set an attribute of your object within the method. Within the method, you can set an attribute. For example, maybe we want to change the name. Exactly the same thing we did here. We want to change the name. And to change the name, we want to add a method to do this. So we say change name. You put in the function. Maybe we want to make it more fancy, then we put in the name as a parameter. So we can allow the name of the car to be changed from outside the object. So now this is where the keyword this come into play. Because we want to set because we want to set this property of this object, we are going to use the word this. In this case, this keyword is referring to this object. So before we do this, I want to show you something. So let's do console log this. So if we come here and we call car.change name, we want to quickly see what this is going to print out here when we call change name. So if you look here, you see what you get here. The object. So your this is the same as when we do something like this here. When we print our object, let's comment change name again and print our car. You see this. Let us uncomment this one and run it again. You see, this is your car and this is this keyword coming from the function. Do you notice the similarity? So whenever you are in a method and you reference this, this is equivalent as when you mention the variable name car outside. So you cannot come here to say car directly within the method. This will not, although you see here, there was no error, but this will not work well because you want, you don't want to statically modify this directly like within this method. You want to use this so that the copy is retained. So when you are inside a method and you want to reference the current object that owns this method, you use this. So in order to change the name, we are doing this dot the name equals to name that is coming from our parameter. So this is how you can use a method to set a property name and change the value. So if we run this here and we say change name to golf, let's print before and after. So if we run this, you see before the name is Fayat. After, the name is now golf. If you want to add a new attribute, you can do the same. The way we do it here, you can do it also within a method by saying this dot the new attribute weight equals to 4,000. So if we run this code now, you will see that before there's nothing like weight. After, you see weight is now assigned. Also, the name was changed to gov and the weight was assigned. So it's not only one attribute you can change at a time, you can change multiple within a method call.